4, 3, 2. Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastiano, joined as always by the BS Express himself, Benny Scala. Benny, how you doing, buddy?
Dan, I'm quite excited. We have a very, very interesting and controversial topic, and I wanted to let you know this is episode number 76. Now, my favorite, I'm going to date myself here, my favorite show of all time was Leave It to Beaver. So as of tonight, we're only 158 episodes behind Leave It to Beaver, and that's the good news. The bad news is that neither Eddie Haskell nor Lumpy Rutherford will be making appearances tonight, unfortunately.
Well, that's one way to look at it. And you said it, a controversial topic. And if we're going to talk about something that's going to instill ranting and that's going to bring out the emotion, I could only think of one person we were going to have on the show today. And we are joined again, friend of the show. He is a director, writer, actor, filmmaker, columnist, cinema host, and professional ranter himself. He is Mike Messier. Mike, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Great intro. And hi, Benny. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, my friend.
Good. Yeah, we've got a big topic, and the topic's been passed around. I think we just might have one shot left in this topic that's been passed around, like perhaps a paralegal was a few years ago, from Vince McMahon to John Laurinaitis, if the allegations are correct.
Well, that's one way to put it. I was hoping that was a play on words, and you hit it right on the head, Mike. There, and we're recording this on a Tuesday. As of just over the last few days, huge story broke in the world of wrestling. Vince McMahon was temporarily relieved or stepped down, depending on which version of events you feel like talking about, as chairman of the WWE and chairman of the board, due to a story that broke involving him paying a $3 million hush money settlement of sorts to a paralegal who he, as the accusation said, and you said, he traded back and forth with John Laurinaitis. The story involved gets a little more graphic than that. She was apparently hired, doubled her salary about a year later, and when she left, she was paid $3 million. So if any of this is true, Vince McMahon paid more hush money for this woman than he did to buy WCW, which is got to put it in perspective. But more than that, other news is broken as part of a cascade of this story, because when you talk about Vince McMahon, you have the inner circle, and of course, I don't think it's related, but right around the same time, there was a story that Kevin Dunn was being investigated for insider trading. And as of this morning, it was confirmed John Laurinaitis has been asked to step down, at least temporarily suspended from his position as, from his position over personnel. And our good friend Brother Love has taken that spot. And I mean, Stephanie McMahon has stepped up back from her early retirement or break, as she put it. And it's crazy across the board. This has been a huge story. The dominoes are starting to fall. Benny, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to fire the first round here and ask Mikey. The wrestling is crazy. We've so many storylines that we thought maybe were actually real, but weren't. But Mike, is there any chance that this is a work?
No, it's not, because when you're talking about a publicly held company and you're talking about things like hush money and sexual misconduct, perhaps, or paying someone a settlement or an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, in order not to tell a story, there would be no gain in that being a work. I mean, that's always a good test for the wrestlers, the wrestling fans. Like, if you think something's a work, look at the possible who's benefiting from doing the work. Now, you could make a case, I guess, that the WWE popped a rating last Friday night because Vince McMahon made a scheduled appearance. It was announced in the afternoon, and then he showed up at night and did a very, 30-second or so speech, and then he surprised people last night by doing Monday Night Raw. So you could make the case that if they were really desperate to pop a rating for 1 week, they could have gone through all this trouble. But in my opinion, it wouldn't be worth the effort. I did want to clarify one thing that Dan said. He actually stepped back is the wordage that they've used, that Vince McMahon stepped back, which I never heard before, to be honest with you. So I think a lot of people are getting confused. They think that, in my opinion, I could be wrong, I think stepping back means like a voluntary, removing yourself from the position rather than being coerced or asked or requested to step down. And furthermore, Vince is still being, even WWE says he's still head of creative, and his 2 appearances in the last 5 days on SmackDown and now Raw, I think it's kind of just a figurehead thing that Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, supposedly running the show now. I think it's still pretty much the Vince McMahon show.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point, Mike, that I didn't even think about continuing that thought, because they released a statement that he had stepped back as CEO. Stephanie McMahon was taking over. Then they released a second statement stating he would not be removing himself as head of creative for the TV shows. And that was the statement where he said, P.S., I'm going to be on SmackDown tonight. And then obviously he was on Raw yesterday to announce John Cena's return. So, I mean, really kind of a power play of sorts, a very much I'm still here regardless of what's happening. I mean, there's some metaphorical ways to describe that are not appropriate, but definitely McMahon measuring something on TV there. And now, Mike, I want your thoughts on this. The key point here is the payoff, the alleged $3 million payoff was personal money. That was Vince McMahon's pocket. He wrote a check. Thank you, to quote Jim Cornette, thank you, fuck you, bye. And right. So she walked off. But the issue is, while she was employed there during this alleged affair and promiscuity, she was granted a huge salary, including a increase. Her second year there, she was making $200,000 a year. And yes, technically the hush money is personal, but when you start getting into company money to take care of this woman, that's where you start to get into the wiggle room of legality and the moral dilemmas, as it were. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and also, just before I forget, the thing you mentioned earlier about Kevin Dunn, the connection with the insider trading is that apparently, whatever, Mr. Dunn sold a good portion of his own personal stock in WWE the day before this report on Vince McMahon's situation and Johnny Laurinaitis' situation got released. Right. So the idea is that Kevin Dunn, because he's super inner circle, he had the information that this story was going to come out. I think the Wall Street Journal was the first one to put it to press. And so that's the thing on Dunn. As far as your most recent question to me, there's another issue here, Dan and Benny, is that Jerry McDevitt, who's the esteemed lawyer for the WWE, he helped them in the steroid trial, everything that the WWE is accused of. I'm sure he was involved in the Owen Hart settlement. I'm guessing, I could be wrong. But McDevitt's been the go-to lawyer. He's held in very high regard by Jim Ross, who always says that if he needed a lawyer, he'd call Jerry McDevitt. And but the problem is that Jerry McDevitt is Vince McMahon's lawyer as well as the WWE's official lawyer. So the question is, even though a lot of us, including myself, think of WWE and Vince McMahon as being one and the same thing, they're not. Vince is like an 80% owner of the WWE at this point because he put up some of that for to be a public traded company. So the conflict of interest is McDevitt being the lawyer for both WWE and Vince McMahon. If Vince McMahon had a $3 million hush agreement with this lady, who has been reported to be 41 years old, then that money should have come directly from Vince McMahon's pockets, not from the WWE. So I think if this investigative committee, who we don't know who's on that investigative committee, as a matter of fact, I don't know, maybe you guys do, if the law, like, is there any legal force that's involved in this situation, or is it just inner WWE house business? But we don't know who's on that committee to investigate this thing. And I think if they're legitimate, if they're on the up and up, the committee, the biggest question is, did this lady get paid off the $3 million from WWE money or from Vince McMahon personal money? That's a big question. that needs to be figured out and answered.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And as of this morning, I should say earlier today, there was more coverage. You mentioned the Wall Street Journal doing a good job on it. That's why I worded it the way I did, because yes, Dunn did sell WWE stock, but there's other issues at play that they're still debating whether or not it's all connected. Certainly seems that way, but this is where you got to, everything is alleged, supposedly, that kind of stuff. But no, as of earlier today, they reported there's now 5 separate investigative law firms involved in this for violating everything from federal security laws, unlawful business practice, what are called fiduciary duties, and the worst part for the board anyway is Vince McMahon's behavior could be what they call allegedly harmful to investors, which is basically they can say your decisions basically your decisions caused the company directly to lose money. And that is where you start getting into the power of, like Apple did with Steve Jobs, Tesla, the fight they had with Elon Musk, where the board actually has the ability to remove him permanently. Now, whether they can force a sale, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, what you touched on is when you start getting 5+ law firms and God knows how many lawyers involved, you start running into some serious legal mud, and someone who represents McMahon personally can't represent the WWE. And then if he's involved in any of the NDAs or contracts that this woman, and yes, her identity is out there, I'd rather not bring it up. I think doxing somebody in a situation like this is shitty. But
Right.
yeah, if he's involved in that, then he's a claimant in this as well, and he can't be involved. Benny, what do you think?
Well, first I have to retract my initial statement about firing the first shot. I think Vince did that. So, and that's why we're here tonight.
Right.
But so my next question to Mike is about Stephanie. So I think I might have my dates wrong here, but I think I have them within a day or two. May 19th, Stephanie McMahon tweets that she's leaving the WWE to quote unquote, I believe the word was focus on her family. June 17th, 28 days later, she's now the interim CEO of the WWE. I mean, she must be one hell of a focuser. I guess my question is, do you think that the leave was just to get her out of the picture for a little bit because she knew it was going to happen, and maybe just to disassociate herself from the mess when the shit hit the fan? Do you think that was part of it?
Well, can I also jump in and say that there's one wrinkle in that story you didn't mention, Benny, which was somewhere in between those 2 points with Stephanie, there was some type of Business Insider website article that came out where basically the WWE kind of buried Stephanie, of all people, on her way out. So that was an interesting thing, that story was like 7 or 10 days earlier than Stephanie coming back.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was saying that was the when the rumblings started happening that Khan was not her. He and Stephanie were not fans of each other. So maybe there was some rumblings that he was pulling a string or two backstage to kind of dirty her name so he could move up the ladder if and when she came back.
Yeah, and I think it might have been Brian Alvarez, because I listen to him a lot. I think he's a pretty logical guy as far as wrestling reporters go. I think it was Alvarez that said maybe, possibly, the idea with them burying Stephanie is, hey, our ratings haven't been that great. Let's use Stephanie as this, convenient scapegoat, say that she wasn't doing the best job that she could have done, so the stockholders will be happy. And maybe that Stephanie agreed to that. Who knows? I mean, I think what's happening, guys, in a big sense, is that as far as the future of this whole thing, I don't want to jump to the big conclusion already, but as far as where is this all headed, I don't know if this is going to affect in a negative way the WWE very much, unless the actual wrestling fans, who's ever left as a wrestling WWE fan specifically, unless they start changing their viewing patterns and kind of the high esteem that they put these people on, namely Vince and the whole family. And when Vince McMahon comes out to the ring, you see people in the crowd, bowing their heads like he's a king. unless the actual common man, like Dusty Rhodes used to portray, starts turning on the McMahon family and realizing what a crock they've been sold and they've been buying for the last however many years, things aren't going to change very much. I think it's really up to the audience to make things better if they're going to get better.
I could see that. Well, going from one child to the other, the story came out following his appearance at the Royal Rumble this year that there was some backstage heat on Shane. There was issues that because he was kind of helping to act as a producer and put that match together, that he put himself over. He was out there too long at the expense of some other talent, and he ended up disappearing, but despite it kind of seeming like he was going to be more involved going forward. And of course, then the story came out that there was heat backstage. There was arguing. Was there, you know, he said, she said kind of stories that come out all the time. The dirt sheets love them. Not to get conspiracy, but do you think that, and maybe not directly at the Rumble, but do you think in recent weeks leading up to this revelation, if, say, Kevin Dunn sold his stock, if they knew this was coming, do you think they kept Shane out of the light as protection for him? Or did he see it coming, or was this just a huge coincidence that he was gone right before all this came to pass?
And I didn't answer your question directly about Stephanie either. Sorry, Benny. I didn't answer that because I got caught up in the other stuff. To answer both questions at this point, I kind of, in my personal opinion, I don't think Shane and Stephanie were aware of the extent of this situation and how it would affect the company. I do not think so. That's just my gut instinct. I could be wrong. But I don't think in Stephanie's case, when she left to take time off from her family, you know, who knows? Maybe things were getting a little tension-filled. I know her husband, Triple H, has had some heart issues, and now he's a pacemaker, right, in his chest.
Correct.
So, I mean, Stephanie and Triple H, they really do need to take care of themselves and enjoy their time together. And they have 3 daughters that I think are all teenagers now. So I think they should be taking some time away from this company and concentrating on their family. They have the money to do so. They have that luxury. And good for them. As far as Shane goes, we know that at one point Shane McMahon had left the WWE for 7 years. So I think Shane has always had daddy issues with Vince because Shane wants to be the apple of his father's eye, but he hasn't really ever been.
Yeah.
Mike, going back to something you said a little bit ago, you know, about when Vince McMahon made the appearance and everybody's bowing like he's a king. You know, I'm quite honestly shocked at it's almost like a cult thing, and it's the do no wrong theory, and I made an example of the Italian mother who's getting stabbed by her son, and she's complaining that he's getting his shirt dirty while he's stabbing her. Like, what is it that, I mean, what would it take for these people to see what kind of guy that they're dealing with here and look for some other way to spend their time and money?
It's the exact same reason why people stormed the Capitol building thinking that they were helping Donald Trump. It's the same type of individual who lives vicariously through a richer man. They live vicariously through someone who's on television, who has more money, more power, more influence. They feel that they're part of this, and they're ignorant to the fact that they're being used. And the WWE fan who's willing to spend $20 or $40 or whatever it is to go see Raw in person when they can sit in the comfort of their own home and watch it for free, they're not using common sense at this point because they've sold themselves thinking that the WWE cares about them, or that the WWE is something worth cheering for, or it's still family entertainment, or whatever it is that they think it is. Ultimately, my theory has been for the last 3 years, I have a video rant about this on Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, that a lot of wrestlers have a father figure complex towards Vincent Kennedy McMahon. You can read Mick Foley's book. He says that Vince is like a father figure to me. The late China, Joni Lawler, said that Vince is like a father to me. All these wrestlers, even Jim Ross, who's about 5 years younger than Vince, said Vince McMahon is like a father to me. So all these wrestling people have a Vince McMahon father figure complex. The wrestling fans, I think also have a father figure complex to Vince McMahon. I think a lot of wrestling fans feel like when they tune into wrestling, they're a part of it, and that they feel like they're being patted on the back by the father figure of Vince McMahon if they tune in and be a good little boy or a good little girl and watch the show. I think it's pretty deep. I mean, I don't know if any other, I wouldn't say any other, but I mean, you talk about things like the Kiss rock band has a very devout following. Star Trek, Star Wars, you know, certain horror films or the horror world in general, they have devout fans. But I don't know if any of these fan bases are as loyal to a fault, and it is to a fault, as the WWE loyalists or the idiot McMarks, as I've been known to call them. And I think nothing was ever more clear that when you saw those guys in the audience bowing to Vince McMahon on Friday night, they are the living personification of idiot McMarks.
Well, I was wondering how long it would take you to drop that. Idiot McMark comes up a lot in your very calm and mellow rants that you can find on your which, by the way, nice sneak in of the plug for your YouTube channel. Wouldn't be a Mike Messier appearance without a self promotion.
That's right.
But
that's right.
We talked about this before, Benny. I know you and I are on the same page here. The affair, the hush money, all this, it's bad. It clearly shows Vince McMahon as especially if the parts are true about him trading her around the office like some kind of object to be given away. I mean, that's just disgusting. But we personally, and I know, Benny, we've talked about this and we both agree on it. Vince McMahon is significantly guilty of much worse, or I should say he's guilty of significantly worse, excuse me. And everything from and Dark Side of the Ring exposed a lot of that, the accusations of paying hush money to cover up the Jimmy Snuka murder, the fact that there was accusations of intimidation and legal very unethical legal wiggling among the steroid trial. I know, Benny, you've mentioned it before, the decision to continue the pay-per-view in a broken, blood-stained ring after Owen Hart died. And I mean, you talked about the father figure and the diehard fans, but what do you think as far as is this a surprise in any way? Is this the Vince McMahon you've always known existed, and now social media is bringing it mainstream? What do you think? Is this, are we right here? Is this McMahon just a terrible person and has been forever, for lack of a better description? Or is this kind of a 70-something-year-old man had an attractive woman in the office, 1, 2, 3 kind of setup?
You know what? There was a case with the first female WWF referee that they never mentioned anymore. I don't want to get her name wrong. I think it was Rita Marie was her ring name, but they had a WWF referee that was a female back in the 80s. And didn't she have a settlement with Vince McMahon? And I believe she allegedly accused him of rape, and they had some type of settlement and an NDA. And also, I've been meaning to say this the whole time. When they discovered this NDA for the $3 million, just recently, apparently they've also discovered a bunch of other NDAs with Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis. So it's not just this one case. This is a lot of cases. So, for instance, when you think of the Bill Cosby situation from 10, 15, 5 years ago, still kind of going on in some ways. If it had just been one case, okay, maybe some people would, think, give him the benefit of the doubt. But when you start piling on a bunch of different accusations, that's more serious. Didn't Sable have a settlement with WWE in between her coming back, like when she left the first time, right? So.
Correct. There was a settlement there, and then as far as talent goes, she's Gail Kim's been she hasn't pulled any punches describing how sleazy the men in the back treated her as far as the corporate side goes when she was hired. But no, you bring up a good point, because that's part of the turning of the tide per se. I actually just shared a memory on my Facebook page the other day about a rant I went on And I remember commenting, I was like, oh yeah, this was back in the day when everyone told me I was being too mean for judging people like Bill Cosby and, Kevin Spacey and who's that pervert TV producer?
Weinstein.
Yes, thank you, Harvey
Weinstein. Harvey
Weinstein.
Weinstein.
And
Yeah.
the idea being that, okay, like you said, one victim, you always want to give accusers the benefit of the doubt, but when you start getting into what could be dozens, in you mentioned Bill Cosby, he just this morning, we're recording it, or this afternoon, we're recording this on the 21st of June. He civil court just found him liable for sexual assault towards a teenager in 1975. So, but when you start getting into what could be dozens of people with the same story, it almost becomes impossible not to believe that it's true. And I think if what you said is right, I was going to get into that in a little bit. So, good on you bringing it up. But and that's part of why there's so many law firms involved now, is there's multiple NDAs, and as of right now, nearly all of them involve female employees, and some combination of Vince and John Laurinaitis going back at least 10 years. So you're talking about, when you start getting into, like I said, dozens, it becomes a bit much. Benny, what do you think?
Well, it's a tree with very, very deep roots. I mean, my own grievances with Vince McMahon, the first one is he killed the wrestling that I love. That's a 5-part show in itself. But I mean, I have been a wrestling fan since 1968, and I can't even. If I can't watch WWE, to me it is totally unwatchable, and I blame him for that. But my biggest thing, this is terrible. This is nothing compared to his other faux pas. I mean, you mentioned Owen Hart. I mean, the guy's blood was still not dried on the mat, and there were literally floorboards broken where the wrestlers in the ring could see the dip, which, number one, besides being totally unethical, I mean, it was very unsafe. But how about Dominic DeNucci? When Bruno died, Vince, I guess, and I've heard this from a very good source, Vince and Stephanie went to Bruno's funeral. I think Dominic was about 10 feet away, and they didn't even acknowledge the man. And here's a guy who gave his life, broke his butt for Vince's father. The very fact that Vince had a WWF to buy from his father is in part to guys like Dominic and Ivan Koloff. And for those guys to have to passed away without getting, let's face it, the WWE Hall of Fame, it's absolute bullshit. It doesn't exist. Where's the building? I mean, where are the votes? Who votes on this? It's not like the Baseball Writers Association of America voting for Roger Clemens or Barry Bonds. But these poor guys, they deserve that honor. For them, it would have meant the world, I'm sure. Ivan Koloff. I mean, how do you exclude Ivan Koloff? The guy beat Bruno clean in the middle of the ring and ended an 8.5-year title reign. I mean, how do you do that? 7.5, actually. But those are my gripes with the guy.
Yeah, and there's plenty of gripes to have, both from fans like ourselves and from former talents. And, if you've ever talked to a guy like Shane Douglas, like I have, you hear a lot of stuff that you won't hear everywhere else. And you can just go to YouTube and find a myriad of shooting reviews. I've been watching a series of shooting reviews with Shelly Martinez, who used to be the Ariel character in WWE ECW, that, ECW reboot. She was the vampire girl wrestler, and she's got some stories that she's telling, and there's a lot of dirt underneath those Titan Tower fingernails.
That's a great way of putting that. I like that. And I kind of want to go back to something we talked about a little bit ago. His appearance when he made the announcement that I'm not stepping down as creative, and that P.S. I'm going to be on SmackDown. You said it. He came out, huge pop, fans bowing, people waving and cheering. And Benny, you said it when we were in the notes before the show, that it almost reminded you of a Jonestown rally. There is an almost cult following of some of these people. And I'm curious, before we can get back to more of the scandal, I mean, he came out, basically said nothing except the slogan of the company, which was a very creative way of saying my ass isn't going anywhere. And it was bad. It was very bad for two reasons. One, it was a clear power move. Ha ha, look at me. But two, you hype up this appearance. I mean, obviously he wasn't going to come out and confess anything or talk about the scandal, but you had to assume there was going to be more substance to it. But I'm wondering, Benny, or excuse me, Mike, but Benny, you as well, since this was kind of your thought, what would it take from this scandal? What would it take for fans to go, enough is enough?
If I could hop in, Benny, I think first off, that answer is going to be different for every fan. The WWE lost a lot of my support. I think it was in 2017 when they started doing the Saudi Arabian shows. I think the first one was the Crown Jewel show, which at the time, the issue for me was just that they weren't booking female wrestlers, and a guy like Sami Zayn, because of his ethnic heritage, they weren't booking females or Sami due to placating to their hosts, the Saudi Arabian Sports Authority. That for me was a turning point. Now, I will admit, and I frequently admit, that I still watch the network specials, the WrestleManias, the SummerSlams, the stuff like that I like to watch because I like to be informed in this ongoing conversation about wrestling that we are all having. But for me, I've spent a whole lot less money on WWE the last 5, 6, 7 years than I did before that. I mean, I used to buy a lot of figures. I used to go to the shows. I mean, I don't know if you guys know, but I did have a job interview as a creative writer for the WWE back in 2007. So I've actually been in the Titan Tower at one point in my life. So I've been pretty into WWE, but based on their behavior and their actions, putting money ahead of anything else, especially when that reporter, the American reporter, was murdered by the Saudi Arabians, and they did a show like within 5 or 6 days of that story coming out, the WWE over there.
Yep.
I've lost my smile, so to speak, for the WWE. And I think each fan, whether it's, the Usos getting multiple DUIs, driving under the influence, or particular talent, whether it's Tony Storm or Bray Wyatt or Braun Strowman, if they fire your favorite wrestler in the middle of a pandemic, or if they fire a bunch of behind the scenes people in the middle of a pandemic, which they've done, I think there's some line that has to be crossed for each and every individual fan to lose their loyalty to WWE. And but there's some fans that are just not going to go away. There's some real hardcore loyalists who just love their WWE. They have nostalgia towards it, which I understand. A lot of fans watched wrestling with their dad or with their parents or with their family, and then they grow up and they bring that to the next generation in their family. So there's a lot of loyalty there. I mean, I wish I had fans for my books that are all available on Amazon, like the WWE has for all their products, to be quite honest, because their fan base is tremendously loyal to the WWE's credit.
Well, Mike, now that you said you lost your smile, I think me and Dan will have to make a road trip to Jacksonville and start looking in corporate cafeterias to see if we can find you as a short order cook. But what really bothered me was, and well, I guess Dan, answer your question. I don't know that this is going to change anything. I kind of agree with Mike. I mean, the true loyal fans are going to rationalize. Well, he had an affair, so what? Everybody does that, or a lot of guys do that, and they're going to just kind of sweep it under the rug. And I don't think really, especially the younger fans, are really going to take the time that we have to really piece together the guy's whole body of work, because this isn't a 2020. Yeah, it is a 2022 issue, but this goes back to 1983 when he bought the company from his father, and he undercut so many promoters that his father swore that they would never do that to. So I mean, we're talking about a 39-year history of doing sleazy things, and I don't know that people are really going to care. I mean, I saw the guy for what he was worth a long time ago, but I think people like us, I think we're in the minority, unfortunately.
Yeah, I sadly I have to agree with you. So speaking of objective, Mike, I want your thoughts on this. we talked about there's 5 law firms. There could be more. There's several outside independent investigations. But let me ask you, how independent do you feel this investigation could be? Is this going to be the Catholic Church? Is this going to be the recent story for anybody that plays video games? Activision Blizzard investigated themselves and determined they did nothing wrong in a massive scandal that the state of California started involving sexual offenses and working conditions. But, they investigated themselves. Nothing. I remember, and I'm not trying to get political, I remember Obama given the speech when the Treasury Department investigated themselves during the allegations involving the using some people using the IRS as a weapon, and he said we investigated ourselves, not a smidgen of corruption. And but then on the other side you have like Bill Cosby, you have Michael Jackson, R. Kelly, where independent investigations overturned every rock they could get a hold of and found all this evidence. So I'm wondering, Mike, what do you think? How independent are these investigations going to be? And more importantly, kind of second to re-ask the same question, will it matter what they find?
Great questions, Dan. And I mean, what I just saw last week, I rewatched the movie Office Space. So maybe they've got the 2 Bobs doing the investigation, right? The 2 Bobs are going to go and give people promotions based on not coming to work. So, it's interesting because we as the fans, or we as the general public, don't really know who these special investigation teams are. It's a great point. Nobody's asking us to be on the special investigation team, or no one's asking us to vote for who should be on it. So we don't know. I don't know. You don't know. We don't know. It reminds me of a couple of years ago, Randy Orton, who everyone puts on this pedestal now, and rightly so, is a great worker. But Randy Orton was accused of being a pervert, basically, by former WWE writers for basically making jokes about his own genitalia, or perhaps exposing himself or something like that. And that was internally investigated, which turned out to be nothing. Marlena, the former Dustin Rhodes' wife, on that Dark Side of the Ring plane episode, she made note of a younger Brock Lesnar exposing himself to her in a dressing room, and she just no-sold it because that's what you do, according to her at that time. My point is, it's a little bit suspicious, and I'm a bit cynical about these investigative teams. I didn't know that there was 5 investigative teams going on until today, Dan, so that's news to me. Where does this fall in the pendulum between the 2 Bobs and the Michael Jackson or Bill Cosby investigators? I don't know. That's a great question. I would rather it be a very serious investigation, but here's the other thing, and I'm not trying to defend Vince McMahon's actions at all, but just hear me out on this. If he did have an agreement with this lady, and they did sign an out-of-court settlement or whatever, a payoff, whatever you want to call it, and if she leaked this situation, the settlement, her feelings on it, because that's all we've heard is her side of the story, anonymously through her friend, through this email to the board of directors, is this lady, the 41-year-old paralegal, is she in violation of the non-disclosure agreement? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that Donald Trump, I believe, sued Stormy Daniels and won, I believe, for breaking their non-disclosure agreement. So it's like the president or the former president sues a porn star for talking about them having sex, and he wins. I mean, we live in a crazy world.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I almost forgot about that. No, you're right. He did get that side, although I think she might be covered because and I'm just basing off of what I've been reading, is I guess the story came from her friend or roommate or somebody that had access to her. I don't know if it was her computer, her emails, whatever, but somebody that saw these messages was the one that said, hey, my friend is having trouble, and they're the one that brought it forward. And if you can prove that they got access to that information without her knowledge, then she's in the clear. But no, to go off of what you were saying, for anybody out there that's interested, Brandon Thurston from excuse me, Brandon Thurston from WrestleNomics was the one who first put the list together. It's Scott and Scott, which is an investigative firm, the Rosen law firm, the Shaw law firm, Brager, Eagle, and Squire, and Lobaton Sucro are the 5 law firms that are all involved. And some of them have he went into the big history of each one, and it's a very good article if you can find his stuff. It was on businesswire.com, to put a plug out for them. They're investigative firms. Their existence is they come in corporate, personal, and they overturn the rocks. They're the special investigators that find all these spiders hiding under the seashell or whatever you want to call it. But I kind of want to touch something you just talked about, and I think it's important, is you mentioned the bonds, and you kind of went into what it's going to take. So let me just have you kind of expand on one thought real quick. Excuse me. Is assuming the absolute worst for them, they find improprieties, they find all this bad stuff. If it ends up with Vince McMahon leaving, and let's say he's forced to resign, he's forced to step down, is it everybody that has to go in order to appease the shareholders? Do you have to get rid of Pritchard and Laurinaitis and Dunn and Stephanie and Tripp? Do you have to get rid of Vince McMahon's circle, or can you kind of like the sacrificial lamb of sorts say, look, the problem is gone, maybe McMahon and Laurinaitis, but everybody else's hands are clean and we're good to go from there?
I think Laurinaitis is the Terry Garvin of this case. We haven't brought up the Ring Boys scandal of 1992 on the Donahue show and everything with that. But I just watched a 1992 Larry King, Vince McMahon, Bruno Sammartino interview last night, or 2 a.m, and it was still powerful. And so I think Laurinaitis, he's already stepped down or been asked to step down or removed, whatever you want to call it. I think he'll be the sacrificial lamb. I don't think Vince is going to end up leaving the company, but if he does, I don't think. Here's the bigger issue: who would you get to replace all those people? If you don't have Stephanie, or if you don't have, Paul Levesque, as Meltzer calls him, or Triple H, as I call him, if you don't have these wrestling people who at least have somewhat of a clue how the WWE should operate, or a Bruce Pritchard, who's a loyal soldier, if nothing else, or a Paul Heyman, or if you don't have some of these people, who are you going to bring in? I mean, are you going to bring in Tony Khan from AEW, or are you going to bring in Jeff Jarrett? I mean, Jarrett's there already. I mean, you could promote Jeff Jarrett, but you have to have some people that have experience. And pro wrestling or WWE sports entertainment, it's a very unique animal. It's a very unique business. The connection to the fans is very unique. Eric Bischoff says it on his podcast that you don't go to your local 20,000 seat hockey arena and watch your favorite soap opera stars come out and act out scenes in front of 20,000 fans. But you do that with wrestling, So, and for instance, a sports team, Jacksonville Jaguars, play in Jacksonville. The Washington Commanders play in, wherever, Northern Virginia. But nobody tours around, with the exception of the Super Bowl. It's a hometown thing, is what I'm saying. But the pro wrestling, whether it's WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, or anybody else, they take the show on the road in the best of times. And I just don't think there's many people qualified to be in that business. That if you replaced all the McMahons, who are you going to replace them with, is my point.
There is a rumor that there will be a 6th law firm. That is Jim Cornette's law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And now I do think it's kind of ironic that, the last time Vince thought he was going to jail during the steroid trial, he brought in Jerry Jarrett, and now he's got Jeff Jarrett. I thought there might be a little bit of irony there. But, Mike, I wanted to step back a little bit and maybe have you play amateur psychologist, because you have alluded to this in a couple of your videos. Vince Sr. and Vince's grandfather, Jesse McMahon, by all accounts, by and large, were pretty reputable promoters and businessmen. What do you think caused the disconnect with Vince?
I believe his parents divorced when Vince was a young man, very young, like a child. And I believe Vince, in the Playboy interview from I think 98 or 99, said that he was raised with a stepfather for a while that he didn't get along with. Vince Jr., and I feel empathy or sympathy towards this. I believe he said he was molested even or beaten. Some bad things happened between him and the stepfather character or somebody else of authority. And I think Vince, said some stuff and he didn't go into great details. And that Playboy interview can probably be found online if people want to dig it up. But I think when he finally connected with his father, I could be wrong, but I don't think Vince Jr. actually spent real time with his father until maybe he was like 10 or 12 or even a young teenager. And that's when he basically put his father and the whole wrestling world and Madison Square Garden and Dr. Jerry Graham on this pedestal. Like this was the Wizard of Oz when you go to color or however, you know what I mean? This was awesome because what he had to compare it to was living with this horrible stepfather character and being abused. So anything would have been better. And I do feel that Junior McMahon, Vince McMahon, he had a tough childhood. He's been working out his issues with God, with women, with friendships, with prestige, with ego. He's been working out these issues for 40 years now, and we've all been spectators to this guy working out his issues. And how he does it is not by going to therapy or taking a Wellbutrin or a Depakote or a lithium. It's by making wrestling and having storylines that have sexual innuendos and perversions and all those type of things. That's we as a collective WWE fan base have been witnesses and maybe compliant in this guy working out his issues for our entertainment or lack thereof.
What do you think happens with him and Linda?
Well, I think, and this is what kind of gets me, guys, because I wouldn't say research, but I listened to a lot of things this past week. One thing I listened to was Dave LaGreca and Bully Ray and Mark Henry and on the Busted Open podcast. Good guys, but I mean, they're loyalists too. And Bubba Ray Dudley was talking with Eric Bischoff over on 83 Weeks, and basically they were saying that Vince had this look in his eye. Like Bubba Ray, Vince had this look in his eye that was different. He's talking about the SmackDown thing on Friday night, right? He had a look in his eye like, if I'm saying goodbye, I'm saying goodbye. Well, he came back on Monday. So the wrestlers, like I keep saying, the wrestlers have such a father figure complex towards this guy. It's unbelievable. It's ingrained. I mean, Mark Henry was very, I don't know what to say. It kind of sounded very excusing making. Booker T is always making excuses for the WWE's bookings and so forth. A lot of these wrestlers or former wrestlers that are still in the community somehow are so biased towards Vince because they're always looking for his approval, and probably more importantly, they're looking for his paychecks.
That's an interesting way to put it. Well, as we wrap up, Mikey, or I should say as we approach the end, we've talked a lot about hypotheticals on what if, what could be. So I'm curious, kind of a two-part question here. First, when Vince was stepped back, as it was so eloquently put, Stephanie McMahon came back, Benny pointed it out, from her 1 month hiatus to take over. One, was she the right choice, or is this just a nepotism thing? Is this, you mentioned the Washington Commanders, is this Dan Snyder being relieved of his duties by the NFL only for his wife to become CEO and he's still in the office every day? Like, is Vince McMahon still running everything and Stephanie's just kind of there? Or is this nepotism run amok, or is maybe she the right choice because of the popularity, or I should say respect, that she has for the board, from the board?
My opinion is that she is kind of a shadow figure. She is a figurehead, and Vince is still kind of calling the shots. Even if she literally has to sign papers, I'm sure Vince is telling her what papers to sign. But I would say this, in my opinion, I could be wrong. I've never met Stephanie McMahon or any of the McMahons in person, but I think Stephanie is probably the one, between her and her brother Shane, she probably is more apt because she never left for 7 years. And she married a great pro wrestler and a guy who really helped develop talent in NXT, Paul Levesque, Triple H. And I think that, you know, maybe I'm marking out a little bit like some of the NXT fans, but that fantasy of Triple H and Stephanie taking over the company and running things the way that they should see it, and everything's going to be like NXT Black and Gold circa 2016. I never bought into that, but maybe I would. You know, I think maybe that's what people are hoping. So I think it's more of Vince putting Stephanie in that position, hey, look, if you're being accused of being a perv with women, right? What better way to say, I'm not a perv with women? You put your own daughter in the top spot instead of your son. So it's a political thing, and it's a smart move by the WWE, put Stephanie in there. And I don't think she's unintelligent. I think Stephanie's intelligent, and I think she's a good performer on TV. And like I said, I don't know her own moralities or anything, but I mean, you could make a point that anybody's better than Vince.
Yeah, I can see that, because this is the point. I think back to the famous pipe bomb promo from CM Punk, where he said, you know, the company's not going to get any better until Vince dies, but kind of backhanded compliment, then it's going to be in the hands of his idiot daughter and doofus son-in-law. Could be prophetic words, but the final question from me, Mike, we talked a lot, like I said, the hypotheticals of what ifs, what could be. Your prediction, just based on what you know now, what happens here? Is it nothing, or does something actually come from this?
My prediction is a bump in the road. I think, like, we didn't have these podcasts and we didn't have social media and wrestling Twitter and so forth back in 1992. But if we did, you know, the Donahue show, I mean, imagine if the Donahue show of 1992, if something like that came out now, we'd be all over Twitter. Our fingers would be bleeding from being on the computer so much, right? But my point is, if it didn't sink him then, the steroids, the Ring Boy scandal, the Saudi Arabian stuff, I mean, I've got one friend of mine, one wrestling friend, Eric, messaged me that he was kind of proud of Vince McMahon having an affair with a younger woman. Like, he said, hey, for his age, he can still get it up. That's great. So that's the type of things we're dealing with here. But I do think this, Dan, and I was thinking about this on my ride over here for the show tonight. I think of, let's just say every 100 WWE fans, like a week ago, I think maybe 2 will lose their smile and leave. And I think 2 of those people could be 2 women, you know, because I think my friend Tantalizing Tony, who's a huge WWE apologist, a huge WWE fan, he felt that Vince going out on SmackDown was insulting to women. And Tony has a 17-year-old daughter that comes with him to all the wrestling shows, and she's the producer of his wrestling podcast. And he's trying to expose his daughter to pro wrestling as a bonding thing, and she enjoys watching it. But when she hears about these scandals and she sees the owner of the company, the guy accused of all these things, just skipping around and dancing around, Tony, huge WWE defender, is embarrassed and ashamed to be watching.
From my perspective, it's kind of ironic because, you know, the only enjoyment that I've gotten from the WWE in the last 10 years is following this shit show every day and see what happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, you figure you hit it on the head when you talked about it, Mike. I mean, going back, you've had several unearthed scandals from the Dark Side of the Ring series. They had the black eye from the Saudi Arabia, the blood money. And then there was the issue where the wrestlers, several of them, said they won't go back to Saudi Arabia after their plane was pretty much held hostage on the tarmac. Money. And of course, there's, now this. I mean, you've had just in the last couple years, just black eye after black eye on the social front. And I think, yes, they're still making record profits because that's how TV contracts work. But when you have the lowest ratings in company history, ticket sales are down. They've practically abandoned most of the house show circuit. It comes a point where you have to admit that fans are leaving, and it's not just, it can't just be the product. Some of it has to be, Mike, like you said, you know, the fans who put their foot down for moral reasons. I mean, there's several prominent personalities on social media that review wrestling that I absolutely, you know, I'm still going to talk about WWE because I have to be on top of this, but I'm not going to talk about Saudi Arabia. I'm not going to cover this incident or this whatever story that happened. I mean, NXT, you had the Velveteen Dream scandal, among other things. And I think you have to see it for what it is, that there is fans. And you mentioned it. I happen to be wearing my VCW shirt. When we go to the VCW shows, my friend's daughter, the little one, we bring her to all the shows. She's a huge fan of wrestling. I kind of created a monster on that front. But, you know, how do I, if she starts asking questions when she gets a little older, how do you explain, like, well, wait a minute, these deviants are running the company, you know, from you mentioned your friend with his daughter, from the perspective of a female. How do you support that and look a young girl in the eyes and say, look, you know, this guy allegedly these horrible things, you know, let's go give them money.
Well, you know, remember that it's an infamous segment on Raw, Vince McMahon having Trish Stratus out of the strip and bark like a dog on her knees from 2001. A friend of mine from my life she was not a big wrestling fan, but she would tune in once in a while. She told me, because I was telling her that I was applying to work for the WWE, and she said, "Oh, that's good for you. I don't watch that anymore." And I said, "Oh, why not?" And she said, "Well, I tuned in one night, and there was a woman on her knees barking like a dog, and I'm not going to watch that." And as far as I know, she never watched again. So, I mean, the WWE, which plays fast and loose with their morals, and they always have a justification for everything. Well, Trish slapped Mr. McMahon at WrestleMania, so it all is all equal. I mean, the wrestlers are so desperate to vindicate and justify their own lack of sticking up for themselves. It's unbelievable. So I think people like CM Punk who leave, or John Moxley, you know, people like myself, I enjoy seeing them wrestle. The CM Punks, the John Moxleys, guys that have kind of gone into the WWE system, gotten themselves a wife and some fame and some money, and then taken their show somewhere else. And if you look at the pattern, that's the pattern with Cody. Cody got Brandy in NXT. Punk got AJ Lee, and Moxley got Renee. And I think Cardano, what's the guy's name? Zack Ryder, Matt Cardano.
Yeah, the Green, the one half
Chelsea
of the
Green.
Yeah.
No, she wasn't the Iconics. She was something else. Chelsea Green. Yeah, but the Iconics lady is with the wrestler.
Oh,
too.
you know what? You're right. I'm thinking of Sean Spears' wife was she was one half of the Iconics. You're right.
Yeah. So that's like 5 of these guys that have gone through the WWE system, you know, your flat back bumps and all that good stuff, and they learn the ropes, so to speak, and then they find a beautiful young woman to take with them, and they're out of there. And that's the type of wrestler that I cheer for. I just watched the NWA pay-per-view. I paid the $50 for the NWA annual pass. So I'm watching that. So here's the thing. There's always going to be pro wrestling. There might always be WWE too. At least it probably will outlive the 3 of us. But wrestling is so simple compared to other forms of entertainment. Sports, you need a 100-yard football field. You need 11 guys on each side. Wrestling, you need a ring, 2 wrestlers, and a ref. And that's a pretty good start. And then things like ring announcers and commentators, and you got to get fans. But as far as, like, if you just look at the logistics, compare pro wrestling to anything like ice hockey or Disney World or anything, it's really a pretty affordable setup for the amount of fans you can get to watch this stuff and enjoy it. Because there's something about the 3 original sports, running, throwing, and fighting. And wrestling would fall into that fighting category. And people enjoy watching it. I mean, I've gone to 400-seat shows and seen Matt Hardy wrestle and get a huge pop in front of 400 people in Fall River, Massachusetts for Top Pro Promotions, because people love wrestling. I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I mean, I've had more fun at a vet. You know, you're lucky if there's 1,000 people in the building than I have going to an arena show with 20, 30 plus thousand. But I mean, Benny, we've taken up most of the time tonight. I'm going to give the final thought to you. What are you thinking?
Well, I miss wrestling, and by wrestling I mean an example: Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno Sammartino, and the next week Bruno Sammartino called him a Judas, and the build up to that match was absolutely incredible. And you knew that every seat in Madison Square Garden was going to be sold. And I'm going to plug our good friend Evan Ginsberg's movie 350 Days. There was a gentleman by the name of Howard Jerome, and he said in the movie, which is my favorite line in the whole movie, there is a longing in the human heart to want to see good triumph over evil. And that was the basic premise of wrestling for years and years and years, and it always worked. And I think WWE has completely blurred the lines. You don't know who to cheer for. So if you don't know who to cheer for, how can you really get invested in the match? Yeah, you can watch these moves that sound like Mexican, drinks you can order at a Mexican restaurant. But I mean, I want to see, Wahoo McDaniel chop Johnny Valentine, or that's wrestling, and that's what I miss.
Well, real quick, Dan, if I could just say to Betty, I think that type of wrestling's still out there. Jacksonville just had a June 19th local wrestling show that the Pope was running, the Charity Alive show, and the VCW that Dan's a part of, the Virginia Championship Wrestling. And like I said, as far as something national, although there are improvements to be made, Billy Corgan with the National Wrestling Alliance is doing a pretty good job. I mean, the Crockett Cup last month was really good. It was a 2-night pay-per-view, a Saturday and a Sunday, and I watched it and I enjoyed it, and I would suggest that people check things out. If you want to watch something current that feels old school, the NWA is pretty strong. If you want cutting edge stuff, there's AEW, there's the Forbidden Door pay-per-view coming up. There's always going to be wrestling. It's up to each individual fan to decide which wrestling they watch.
Well said, Mike. And I have to agree with you on that one. I have the Fight TV subscription just for the AEW, or excuse me, the NWA shows. And I mean, Trevor Murdoch and some of the talent that comes through there. And of course, I don't know if it's still available, but that mini series they did when Tim Storm was the champion, as they were transitioning into thank you, the 10 pounds of gold, into the debut of NWA Power. And of course, thinking back to one of their earlier episodes when the Rock and Roll Express came out of retirement to win the tag titles one more time, there was more emotion in that less than 10-minute match than I've seen in years, and I can't recommend it enough. But Mike, thank you again so much for your time. Always insightful. I know you always have something to say when it comes to the WWE and when it comes to this, and I mean that as a compliment. You're a knowledgeable man, and of course, you wouldn't be an appearance on the show without plugging yourself. What do you got coming up, Mike?
Well, MikeMessier.com for all your Mike Messier needs, wants, and desires. I've been spending a lot of time on my books. I do have a book out now, Art and War of Directing Short Films, web series, and television. And basically, if you go to MikeMessier.com and scroll to the bottom, Benny was kind enough to read and do the foreword to Fight or Play Basketball, my coming-of-age sports novel. And I think Benny also enjoyed my it's simply called Pro Wrestling Trivia by Smart Mike Messier. It's got a picture of Taz versus Abu that I took. And I think it's like 13 or 14 episodes, they call it, on the Kindle Vella thing, where I have some pretty good questions, pro wrestling trivia questions that people can play. If you have Amazon Prime, I think you can read it more or less for free.
Yes.
So, just scroll down to MikeMessier.com. If you want to, like I said, subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. Plenty of Pro Wrestling Rants, AEW clips. My interview with Bob Backlund, you guys are on it, because we did the Bret Hart episode the last time I was on, so that's on there. And MikeMessier.com, scroll to the bottom, and all my social media links are at the bottom of Mike Messier, MESSIER.com. Thank you.
There you have it. And I just want to point out, subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube is both a name and the slogan and a suggestion. It is the name of the channel. Great stuff. MikeMessier.com. For the BS Express himself, Benny Scala, I'm Dan Sebastiano. It's been a great episode, folks, and thank you very much. Have a good night, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.